I want to start with a question that sounds simple, but I think is actually pretty much impossible to answer.
Okay.
If I asked you to visualize your past, your entire history up to this moment, what does that look like in your head?
Well, most people go straight to geometry. A line.
Right. It's a timeline. Point A is birth, point B is high school, point C is that, embarrassing thing you did 3 years ago. It's just linear. It stretches out behind you like a road.
That is absolutely the default setting for the human brain. We love the timeline because it suggests progress. It suggests the past is back there and we're up here.
But I've been reading this essay you sent over, and it has completely messed that up for me. It's called Wallpaper by a writer named Pedro Malha. And honestly,
It's a little claustrophobic.
it is intensely claustrophobic, but I think that's exactly the point. Malha is a philosopher who deals a lot with the architecture of the mind. And his argument here is radical.
Okay.
He says, forget the timeline. The past isn't a road you leave behind. It's room you're currently standing in. And we are going to talk about the walls of that room. Because Malha's theory is that our memories, especially the heavy ones, the traumatic ones, they aren't just events on a calendar. They're layers. They're wallpaper.
This is a deep dive into the phenomenology of memory.
Okay, hold on. Pause the tape. Phenomenology. That is a $10 word if I ever heard one. Before we get into the wallpaper, what are we actually talking about there?
Fair point. In simple terms, phenomenology isn't about what happened. It's about the texture of the experience. It's the study of how it feels to be inside a moment.
Ah.
Okay, so a historian might say the car crash happened on a Tuesday. A phenomenologist asks, what did the air feel like in the split second before the glass broke?
Got it. So we aren't fact-checking the past today. We are kind of vibe-checking the past.
In a manner of speaking, yes. We're analyzing the sensory experience of living with our own history. And Malha starts with a very specific, very heavy concept, the monolith.
This is the part that hit me the hardest. He talks about those periods in life. Maybe it's a breakup, a grief, a depression, or just a really dark year where the timeline it breaks down.
Malha writes that when you're in a period of deep trauma or an intense experience, it doesn't feel like a version of the past. It arrives as the past itself.
Wow.
He says it arrived, the way a room feels like the only room you are in.
That is such a terrifyingly accurate description. When you're deep in a bad time, you can't imagine a time before it, and you certainly can't imagine a time after it. It's just the room.
It creates this totalizing gravity. Malha points out that a dominant narrative, let's call it the bad year, it gathers everything around it.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the ordinary things you did during that time.
Mm-hmm.
Buying groceries, commuting to work, watching TV.
Right, the boring stuff.
But in the monolith, those things lose their independence. Malha says, nothing stood beside it without being drawn back into the same meaning.
So you don't remember buying milk on a Tuesday. You remember buying milk while you were heartbroken.
Exactly. The heartbreak swallows the milk.
It's like a black hole.
Yeah.
It sucks in all the light from the ordinary days. I think everyone has felt that. You look back at a specific year, and the whole thing just feels gray.
Yes.
Even the sunny days feel gray in retrospect because the narrative of that year creates a filter over the lens.
And this is where Malha gets very physical. He describes the onset of this state not as a thought, but as a snap.
The somatic response. The body knowing before the brain does.
He describes the air tightening. He mentions the sound of a tap running somewhere in the house.
Oh, that image gave me chills. Just a tap running. Why is that so ominous?
Because it represents the lack of control. You follow the sound, but your body has already reacted. You're inside it with no distance.
Right.
And that is the crux of the wallpaper problem. When you're staring at a wall from 2 inches away, you don't see a pattern. You just see a color. You don't know it's wallpaper because it's your entire field of vision.
So we have this monolithic wall. It's dark, it's heavy, and it covers everything. The timeline is gone. We're just trapped in this room. The logical question is, how do we get out? Do we knock down the wall?
You'd think so.
Mm-hmm.
But Malha argues that you can't knock down the wall because the wall is your mind. You have to live there.
Okay.
The change, the healing, if you want to call it that, it comes from distance.
He has this phrase, standing nearer without being taken so quickly, which sounds a bit like exposure therapy to me.
It is similar. It's the ability to look at the wall and finally recognize that it's a surface. It's not the structural integrity of the house. It's just a layer of paper that was glued there at some point. And if it was glued there,
It has an edge.
it has an edge.
And this is where the sensory details in the essay go from, philosophical to making my skin crawl. Because he describes the act of peeling that wallpaper, and it is not a satisfying YouTube video.
No, it is not a clean strip. What stood out to you in that description?
The sound. He talks about the dry sound. You know that sound. When paper has been stuck to plaster for 20 years and you pull it, it's that rasping, tearing noise.
A sound distinct from expectation.
Yeah.
Mala notes that we expect memory to be fluid, like water. But this kind of memory is dry. It's brittle.
And the dust. He mentions the dust loosening behind it and the way the glue still holds in some places so the paper tears unevenly, and just such a messy image.
It is.
It feels like he's saying that dealing with the past isn't this clean, therapeutic breakthrough. It's scraping glue off a wall with your fingernails.
That is a perfect articulation of his point. We want the breakthrough to be this cinematic moment. We want the music to swell and the realization to wash over us.
Yeah.
But Malha says, no, it is dusty. It sticks to your fingers. It tears in the wrong places.
Yeah.
But, and this is the aha moment, when you peel back that top layer of trauma, what is underneath?
Logically, I'd expect, I don't know, a blank wall. Or maybe fresh paint.
You find more wallpaper.
Which is just exhausting.
It is exhausting. But it's also hopeful. Malha describes seeing older paper underneath. He mentions 80s print, sun-faded in places, glued hard in others.
Right.
And beneath that, Art Deco lines, still crisp.
Okay, stop there, because this is the part that breaks the timeline metaphor completely. He's saying that the Art Deco layer, let's call that your childhood or a happy time in your 20s, it didn't go away. It didn't get overwritten by the trauma.
Correct. We tend to think of memory like saving a Word document. You edit the file, you hit save, and the old version is gone.
Yeah.
Malha is saying memory is physical layering. The Art Deco lines were there the whole time. Even when the room was pitch black, even when the monoliths was the only thing you could see, the geometry of that previous joy was sitting right there, millimeters beneath the surface.
That's wild to think about. It means we're walking around carrying every single version of ourselves at once. I'm not just current me, I'm 5-year-old me, and heartbroken me, and happy me, all just plastered on top of each other.
It creates a thick history. The room has depth.
Yeah.
And realizing that the bad year is just the top layer is the beginning of the shift.
Right.
It stops being the only reality and starts being just the most recent reality.
So let's talk about what happens when that paper finally rips. When you hear that dry sound and a piece of the trauma layer comes off, what comes back? Because Malha suggests it's not the big stuff. It's not your graduation or your wedding day.
No, this is the section on the return to the ordinary. And I will admit, this is where the essay moved me the most. Because the things that return are aggressively mundane.
Aggressively Mundane is a great band name, by the way.
It really is.
But yeah, he talks about paper plates.
He does. He contrasts the heavy memories with the light ones. So on the top layer, the trauma layer, you have these high contrast, intense images. He describes a doorway with light behind a shape or a hand on a shoulder.
And the kettle. We have to mention the kettle.
A screaming kettle.
Yeah. The sound too loud for the room. That is such a stress response. It's that feeling when your nerves are so fried that a household appliance sounds like a siren.
Exactly. The trauma memory is loud, it demands attention. But when the paper peels, what do you find underneath? You find a birthday party, but not the cake cutting. You find paper plates bending under the weight of cake.
Icing pushed aside with a plastic fork.
Or a friend waiting at a school gate sharing crisps from a torn bag.
Why those? Why does my brain save the torn bag of crisps? Why not the conversation I was having?
Because the conversation is part of a narrative. But the torn bag of crisps, the bending plate, those are just matter. They're out of place. They don't fit the story of the bad time. If you were making a movie about a tragedy, you'd cut the scene where the protagonist is just eating chips and waiting for a bus. It's boring.
It kills the pacing.
It dilutes the drama. But Malha argues that these boring fragments are the most important things we possess because they prove that the trauma was not total.
That's a powerful thought. The paper plate proves that even when I thought my world was ending, I was still just a person eating cake. The ordinary world kept spinning.
It's the interruption of the tragedy. These memories arrive without asking to be included, without fitting anywhere. They're defiant little scraps of reality. They remind you that you existed outside of the pain. You were a person who ate crisps, who laughed at jokes that stopped being funny, who watched cars pass by.
It's weirdly validating. It makes me want to pay more attention to the boring stuff happening right now. Like, maybe this coffee cup on the table is going to be the thing that saves me in 10 years.
Very well might be. It's the anchor. But, and we have to pivot here, because Malha pulls the rug out from under us a little bit. This isn't a fairy tale.
Yeah, I was waiting for this. We've peeled the wallpaper, we found the crisps, we found the Art Deco. Now we live happily ever after in a vintage room, right?
Not even close.
Yeah.
Malha is a realist. He introduces the concept of coexistence. He writes, they do not join, they do not separate cleanly either.
Meaning the bad wallpaper doesn't just disappear.
It does not disappear. You don't get to burn it. The return to the ordinary doesn't replace the trauma. It sits beside it.
That feels unfair. Can I say that? It feels unfair. If I do the work to peel back the layers, I want the bad stuff gone. I want a refund on the trauma.
I think we all want the clean slate. We'd all want to be rebooted. But Malha argues that the human mind doesn't have a delete button. It only has a minimize window.
Okay.
The top layer, the pain remains in pieces. Recognizable. You still know what that hard time was. That knowledge is permanent.
So it's a both-and situation. You have the screaming kettle AD, the bending paper plate. They're sharing the wall.
And that is a chaotic image. Think about what that room looks like. It has patches of 1920s Art Deco, patches of 1980s floral, and patches of the dark, heavy monolith, all exposed at the same time.
It's a mess. It's a collage made by a madman.
It's a collage made by life. And Malha suggests that this messiness is actually a higher form of healing than erasure.
How so?
Because if you erased the bad year, you would lose the truth of who you are. Instead, you get to keep the truth of the pain, but you dilute its power by surrounding it with the truth of the paper plate.
You dilute the poison.
You change the ratio. The wall isn't 100% trauma anymore. Maybe now it's 40% trauma, 30% boredom, and 30% Art Deco joy.
But he also warns that it's not stable. He has that line at the end, it is not steady, it opens and closes.
That is the part that feels most true to anyone who has actually recovered from something. You can have a great month where the Art Deco layer is shining through and you feel connected to your old self. And then on a random Tuesday, the wall closes up again.
You find yourself back against the most recent surface, hand flat against the cold wall.
And the room feels small again. The monolith returns. Malha wants us to know that this is not failure. It's just the nature of the mechanism. The wallpaper is loose, but it flaps. Sometimes it covers the view.
I think that's so important for people to hear, because when you have a bad day after a good month, you feel like you're back at square one. You feel like, oh, I haven't healed at all. I'm still stuck in the room.
But the difference is knowledge. The first time you were in the room, you thought the wall was solid stone. Now, even when the paper flaps back down and covers everything, you know intellectually that there's a paper plate underneath. You know the wall is permeable.
It changes the fear. It doesn't change the view, but it changes the fear.
Precisely. It turns the prison into a living space. A messy, chaotic, mismatched living space, but one you can actually inhabit.
I love the idea of the messy living room of the mind. It takes the pressure off. We're all just walking around with terrible interior design that we can't fully renovate.
The decorator has terrible taste, but excellent durability.
Okay, so let's bring this home. We've gone from the timeline to the room, from the monolith to the peeling paper. For the person listening to this, maybe they're driving, maybe they're washing dishes. Why does this matter? What do they do with this?
I think it's an invitation to be a scavenger.
A scavenger.
A scavenger of your own history. Stop looking for the big story of your life. Stop trying to make the narrative fit some perfect arc. Instead, look for the loose corners.
Listen for the dry sound.
Listen for the dry sound. And when a random, useless memory pops into your head, a smell of rain, a specific t-shirt you used to wear, a song that played in the supermarket, don't dismiss it.
Don't say that's irrelevant.
Never say it's irrelevant. That is a piece of the underlayer breaking through. That is proof that you are more than the worst thing that happened to you.
It's permission to let the past be a collage, to let it be torn and glued and weird.
And to recognize that even in the darkest room, the Art Deco lines were still there. They're just waiting for the glue to dry out.
I'm going to be thinking about bending paper plates all week. That image is stuck with me.
It's a good image to hold on to.
Huge thanks to Pedro Malha for this essay. It's a trip, but a good one. And thanks to all of you for diving into the messy room with us.
It was a pleasure.
We'll see you in the next deep dive. Take care of your walls.